The disco, people say weird stuff about it. They say that it is about like a detective stuff, or some people say that it's about politics, or some say it's about some like deep internal turmoil or the human condition. I don't know what these people are talking about. It is obvious that Disco Elysium is about painting. It has a little bit of everything in it. It has portraiture, it has landscape, it has metaphysical portraiture, the isometric, of course, the study of composition. These dialogue framings when you're in conversations with character are often kind of comic bookish if you look at them. You know, of light and shadow, and of techniques like edge hierarchy, where you obfuscate the line between one shape and another to like make the gradation smooth and not pull your eye in, and as a part of this complex composition of the image. That is all in the game. The game is a study about all of these things, and all of these techniques come together to make this game.
In these documentaries, we often dive into the technical. It's a somewhat inescapable byproduct of exploring the work of pieces of software. But today, in the 4th episode of our series on Disco Elysium, we're going to try our best to keep things artistic. Disco Elysium had a small art team by any standards. A couple of artists, one animator, a 3D guy, and a few other contributors. But before we dive into their work, I wanted to start with Alexander Rostov, as his painterly style was the visual fulcrum of this entire project. What was the pathway through which he achieved the look of Disco Elysium, and what practices and decisions led him down his particular artistic path?
You need to develop your taste, and you need to look at a lot of art. And so you see what is good, what is bad, you try to make it like the good guys, and you try to not make it like the bad guys. Physical practice, you can finally process it into a thing and like understand what it is that you were doing. Trying out this art stuff like autodidactically was just grind the anatomy until you remember it, and draw from memory until it looks good enough, and compare against the reference drawing, or just keep painting the colors until they work. And then the internet as well. I'm of the generation of the internet. At first there was less information there. Today there is. You can get wonderful information on like how to draw, how painting works, what are the sort of fundamental concepts of it. In my age, when I was a wee little lad, we only had like how to draw an anime face tutorial.
And look at your anime faces now.
Oh my God, there was a critical moment in my youth where I had to this is like a fork in the river, in the upstream. Like, does it go drown this town, or does it flood this village? Where does the river go? Do you choose the anime or do you choose the realism? And I agonized over that decision. But it did give me a kind of a perspective on it. Well, later it gave me a perspective on it that decision didn't really mean anything, that it's all the same thing, and that you're simply learning different aspects of image craft. Well, before me was and when I was very young, was the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the world, an apocalyptic event in which the great endeavor collapsed in on itself, and horrible things came out of it, and maybe some nice things. What the Soviet Union did was that it pumped a lot of money into cultural arts. So the artists in the 60s and 70s, like the people who were translating books, were like the intellectuals of the age. So this literary quality was extremely high, and the works that they were writing, and the artists could get a beautiful apartment on the top of the building somewhere, and it was a respected class. And then with the 90s, the artist suddenly became derogatory as an artist. And so the prestige of the artist started declining, but this mysterious, some sort of an aura remained, still like this elven world of the arts. That people just didn't know how to draw like the old masters anymore. Like, we've forgotten ancient, like secret knowledge, impossible to reclaim. Later I thankfully found out that was wrong. So for me, growing up in this ghost of art being respected, and then the state that it was in then, the state that it was in, it was unacceptable. I don't know. The artist was reduced to running around after getting grants and then backstabbing each other for like 700 euros so you can make your lousy little art thing that can be in the gallery that you barely have any time to conceptualize or think through or make into something wondrous and big like art needs to be. And so all the art you see is mediocre and miserable, and the artists are mediocre and miserable, and the world is mediocre and miserable in the 90s and early 2000s. So it makes one very critical towards that and towards the art institutions. Art must be done outside of institutions.
Nice to meet you. Hello.
Oh my god! What happened?
What's Doggy's name?
Pushti.
Pushti?
Pushti.
Pushti.
Yeah.
Hello, Pushti.
This is the neighborhood. This is where I grew up.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the Soviet dreams. You have the panel houses, you have the kindergartens and schools in between the panel houses. The panel houses are like fortress walls around them, protecting the children. Much like the children's crush in Alpha Centauri, the best of the civilization games. Then you have this forest here. There's horses there that just ride around because the hippodrome is over there. And then if you follow this this wooded road down, then you get to the Stromi beach, which is what the Martinaise beach is sort of modeled on. The sad autumnal version of it. If you go there today, you will see the happy summer version of it.
What's it like in the winter?
Oh, it's dreadful. Sometimes it like ices over and there's just like this line of ice that goes into the horizon. But other times, if you get temperature fluctuations happening, you get this cool thing where the sheets of ice, they come on top of each other and it's like shark teeth coming out of the water at you. That's very fun, but it happens quite rarely. The garage is the most important building for a child growing up in Eastern Europe, because behind the garage is where the dominion of the child lies, where the eyes of the parent do not reach. So behind the garage is where you keep, where you burn the matches, of course. I might have caused a couple of wildfires here in my youth. It is also, of course, where you keep the porno mags with the other children that you find on the roof of the garages, so any adults walking dogs back there don't see them. And here they're gonna build a tramway, but this just used to be a wasteland. A wonderful wasteland.
Did you find porno mags in the wasteland? We used to find them in the woods.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm asking so much about porno.
Yeah. I don't know. The porn mags are very important for the children. It's like where you learn the female form for the artist, you see, and it's also like this secret for children to bond over.
Great loot.
Great loot.
Looting them from the wasteland. This was our wasteland too.
What's going on, Zim? Doing something with code. Yeah. Why are you sitting in my seat? That's where I sit. So the art team was quite cozy. It was me, Siim Raidma, who I already mentioned, who was doing the technical stuff. Kaspar Tammsalu, who was doing location concept art. He has a wonderful sense for domestic compositions. Quite a few of the dialogue frames are also sort of designed by him, because he's a comic book artist by heart. When you meet Everard Clare, you have these, I don't know, in the image you will see that the container frames put Everard here and you're like lined in between these frames, and like all of this stuff. Kaspar designed those like locations. Rauno Somelar was our 3D heavy cannon. He knew how to do 3D. Nobody else knew how to do 3D. Young Markus Harma was our junior artist. It's hard to sort of pinpoint down what he did. He sort of helped out with a lot of stuff, and like in the end, just like he's like a little bit all over the place. He did the loading screens, for instance. That's like a image that he did, and modeled a bunch of stuff. On the character side, we had a wonderful Eastern European caricature, Pavel Kuba, we called him Pasha. So he came on quite late. He sculpted some of the characters. He sculpted the armors and Evrard Claire and Morel, some of these like more involved characters. There's Eduardo Rubio, who was the animator. He basically animated the entire thing.
Eduardo, I think, came on board around the time I came on board. He was there from the beginning, and he was there all the way. Like I have nothing but positive things to say about working with Eduardo. He's like a wonderful person. Such a distinct and unique animation style as well. Like it kind of takes this character model art style of Disco, and it puts a little bit of cartooniness on top of it, but it's exactly this right amount of cartoony that anything more and it might actually feel a little childish, but anything less and it would just not have that charm.
We went for Unity and Blender because that's the tools I knew, and that's kind of the privilege of coming in early is that we're going to use this and this. And anyone else we're going to hire is going to either deal with it or not join us. Which is great because Blender is really scriptable and something even I could build a pipeline out of. So it starts with either a sketch of the level or like the interior or the exterior, or just a block out inside Blender. Then we kind of flesh it out, but not too much because most of the details will be painted in. In Blender we get to a point where it's mostly like color blocked and enough details are there so that the objects have their silhouettes, which we do need for the height maps and rendering. Blender will render out colors, normal is like the surface normals for the whole map, absolute height, which is a trick we got from the Pillars of Eternity video. Then we have a cloud map, which is like a different color for each object, which helps with the painting over and like masking in Photoshop. Roster would grab the color map and just paint over it.
I got my first Wacom Cintiq. Oh my god, this is the happiest day of my life. This giant screen that I can draw on all day for the next 5, 6, 7 years of my life. Oh my god, I was so happy. A big distinction in the performance of art is whether you are drawing from the wrist, doing like little sketchbook drawings, this gives you this curvature of the wrist, or whether you are doing it from the shoulder, which gives you this absolute control to do straight lines or like anything. From the internet I learned that they teach you to use your shoulder to draw, that this is the superior, more controlled kind of way to do it. And with the Cintiq you can really sort of do it, it's big enough. You're drawing to imitate painting and the small, but on the big you can kind of like paint, you can like do these strokes. And like, the isometric image is wonderful in that it is flat. There's none of this 3D like a million viewpoints, it's just this one image. So in essence you can design the entire game as if it was like a painting, and that's kind of what we did. It's also like the cutest image. It's this it's the image of children playing with toys. It's this like childhood wonder of the toy house and moving little guys around and so on. That's why the isometric thing basically just works so well. You just plug the painterly knowledge into it and you simply make a better isometric image. Because painting is all about the study of the image and how to guide the eye and make this part of the image clean and this part of the image very textured and active and complex to pull your eye here, and then design these like motion lines through the image to like draw the eye of the viewer. Well, of course, a complex problem then is if you paint this background with all of these brush strokes and then you have these 3D models that you want there to move around because it's so complicated to do like 2D animate them. And then you have this challenge of like, oh my god, how do you take this Blin Fong shaded, rounded, bulbous 3D form and how to integrate it into like the painterly sensibilities of the image. So if you know about normal maps, a normal map takes a 3D surface and then maps an image on it which says that this point is actually looking that way. So you can do this small detail stuff. It's like standard video game techniques, but what is not very standard is what we try to do is that we try to hand paint them. And that is like, mind arithmetic. And in the end, we discovered that you can just kind of sculpt it like this, that you just do this planar simplification. It's like Soviet monuments often have these happening. It is the magical seam right now. He's just like, he's the code wizard. Basically, he made the pixel math and he made the screen do the thing that it needed to do. I don't know, Disco Elysium would have been impossible without him, basically.
So the interesting stuff, which is kind of we made up on the go, which was a shadow map, which we rendered like 3 directions of shadows, which is the morning, noon, and evening. And it was interesting to kind of get the angle just right, because the whole game will have the same direction of sunlight in the morning and in the evening.
Basically 3 times of day with their own lights, and then nighttime, which is sort of like without, I guess, shadows in that sense. But this is like just shadow information is multiplied over the main like painting. So it's just this one painting, and then the shadow does like all the...
And at the last moment we decided like for the noon shadows, like the sun was going basically from above the camera. At the last moment before like rendering out most of the stuff, Rostov decided to put the sun like on the other side of the map, which means all of the like the ground is still light, but all of the buildings are now in shadow, dark. So that increased contrast. So it was really flat before, and that decision kind of made the noon shadows a lot better. So it's 3 directions because we had like 3 channels in a PNG, right? So RGB will be the three direction of the sun.
And the occlusion, he reverse engineered the depth map thing, so that the world is just a flat image, but it has rendered out a height map so that it knows if your character is like standing behind something or out in front of something. Some trigonometric calculations are being done for each pixels to like occlude and do stuff like that. There's a lot of like little shader effect stuff happening there. If you like walk around the world, for instance, we have a kind of a remnant of fog of war, but we didn't end up using it in a sort of a traditional way. It sort of serves as a, what do you call it, vignette. In photography, there's the vignette around it, but because the world is so painterly and such a textured thing, then it doesn't work if you just have like a gradient on the edge. It like makes the image cheaper. So instead, the fog of war, this darkness of the image, it almost like snakes through the image, because what it does is it goes first from the lighter parts and remains longer in the darker. So it's like if you're walking along this tiled floor, Martinaise ground there, then you will see that this fog in the edges, it's just like snaking away into the cracks of between the tiles, and the tiles come gleaming out. And it's like super subtle, but it just adds so much to the liveliness of the image. Because there was a big problem in general that the painting is so still. How do you bring it to life? Yeah, that was a big problem. We just like over the years developed there's some obvious things. Put a little rotating fan in a room, and you put these 3D assets that are like doing some stuff somewhere. The characters are doing their little like idle loops and stuff. Little things like trees are lying about perspective. The tops of trees are slightly doing a parallax, and then it fades out to the root. So just as you're walking, the trees are like slightly just sliding. Other things, when you walk, for instance, when you go into the courtyard behind the Whirling in Rags, you will see that the houses that are in the foreground tall up, they get shadowed. So it gives you depth perception into the image as well. The courtyard is normal color, but it calculates this trigonometry that this is closer to the camera, and it sort of turns it into a silhouette. And it makes the image more readable. Because part of this isometric image is also that everything is sort of same importance. You can't quite like, you lose one of these tools of like control over it. But then with that we got to get it back, and it also just makes the image change as you're moving. It like adds a little bit of this life in there. I don't know, simmering light beams that are just planes with like an animated texture on it, and little barks somewhere flying around, I think. But the compositions are mostly in the dialogue compositions. For the mouse, you just click on the character, and then your guy walks into a predefined position that looks good. They're like talking to each other, which is kind of annoying when you're gamepad controlling. You're up to the character, talk to him, but now your guy needs to move a little. I don't know how to design around it because it's kind of important for the composition and the psychology of how the two characters are communicating with each other, that they are in these specially designed locations, and then it goes into this image composition and so on. It was quite the effort to figure out how to paint this giant painting, because you can only have so many pixels in one Photoshop file before the computer runs out of RAM, which is a constant problem. RAM, my eternal enemy. In Photoshop, you can link images into other images. So the mega massive painting of the world is basically a bunch of Photoshop images that are these tiles that have been tuk. Here's like the tiles of the behind the whirling and in rags courtyard, and this edge overlaps with the what is at the doomed commercial area, outside area, the bookstore and stuff. And then you paint this image and you paint this image, and then you carefully paint the what's in between, thinking exactly which surface should be considered the master, the overriding truth on which one. And then you just stitch these Photoshop files together into like a giant painting.
So we have a lot of pixels in the game, right? So the exterior of Martinaise is like, I found a number, quoting myself, is like 10 gigapixels of texture information. It's a lot of pixels, and we want to make it work without loading screens. Virtual texturing came to mind, which was like id Software Rage in 2011, I think, did the mega textures thing. It was quite big at one point. Being arrogant and ambitious, sure, why not? Let's do this instead of loading screens. It was like, it's a miracle that it worked out. But Unity was at a weird spot at this exact moment where I think they had bought a company that did virtual texturing, but they hadn't done anything with it. It's like at this point it wasn't a pattern for Unity yet. So that was unavailable to us, and the only other competitor with virtual texturing was Amplify Texture 2. It was a bit of a gamble because it wasn't ported to consoles yet, but luckily enough they were like super responsive. We just started using it and asking dumb questions. They kept answering them to the point where they just sent the whole source for the plugin. So fast forward, Amplify Creations ended up being Zaun Porta, which is part of the studio.
So much of the soul of Disco Elysium comes through the various character portraits. Like much of the art in the game, while Rostov was the primary vision holder, they were collaborations between art writers and design, doing more than just showing the face of the person or skill you're talking to, but giving subtle visual insight into their own place within the story. So what was the process through which these iconic images were created?
For every portrait artist, there is the hero portraitist, and for a lot of them it is, of course, the Velázquez, the original psychological portraitist. And there you look at his portrait of that Pope Innocent X, not so innocent, but the look in the eyes, and it reveals something. It is not simply a flattering picture of some guy, but you can also tell that guy is a bit of an asshole. That is the minimum accepted quality. The portrait needs to be as good as Velázquez. So there needs to be something in there, it just can't be a picture of a pretty person. But I don't know, this is sort of just like intuitive stuff. You kind of like, I don't know, try to read yourself into the character, which is fortunately quite easy because the writers are very good at making them into proper characters. Someone who you can read into and really picture depth of emotional world behind those words, and eventually the image. Yes, of course, symbolism. Shapes and images and things, they all mean stuff and they do stuff. Well, what we do is we take in the external world. The external world is so big, but if you put a frame around it, it becomes this image that you can comprehend. It's like this framing of the image, I call this event. And the portrait is this framed image, but it is still basically sending in this direct, strong, raw signal into your head. And different shapes, they have like different effects on us. A circle is round and somehow warm, and welcome also goes on forever. There's like other aspects to it, but it's like for the character of Kim, that is the sort of like round, solid, is not falling apart, does not have weaknesses in the corners or like structural issues or so. You just like feel this. It just communicates with your spine somehow. While Janus has the rectangle and the stuff, and it's like keeps a straight back and shit together because it's kind of rotten and black and it's kind of scribbled in a little bit. And it's also black because of depression of the color of black, and all of these sort of when you sort of say them out loud are very banal things to point out, but when you don't mention it and they're just in the image, they just do what I said, and you just layer these different effects upon you, and eventually it's just there's just so many of these effects that you layer upon each other that it just does stuff to you. It's like when you look at Rothko's paintings, if you look at them like online on a computer screen, Mark Rothko, it's like this made a canvas rectangle. But when you like see it in real life and you stand in front of it and the uninterrupted, unisolated, pure signal enters your eye, suddenly you're like transfixed around it and you like understand the strength of like what is happening there. Very subtle, very easy to make fun of as well, but also incredibly powerful. And then I don't know. Then there's the sort of semantic symbolist layer that's sort of above it or together with it, where icon painting, the halo, the nimbus, and so on. So all of these things are like just whenever you go in to make one of those portraits, you're just trying to feel out like what is a kind of like an appropriate trick, technique, a curveball that you can like put into this image to manipulate the player into feeling an emotion. And in a way, the entire art style of the game is sort of this, is a study into subjectivity. When a painting differs from the natural real of it, one can ask a question, why does it differ? And if you're careful about it, then each of these whys can, like, you can say something with it. It's the space that you can put meaning into an image. The entire game is a little bit like that, but the portraits are like a small focused study of that. A lot of the obvious effects have been smoothed out by the fans. They now point out that Kuno is in the same pose as Half-Light, sort of like embodying that like fight or flight response. But otherwise Kuno is fairly naturalistically painted, like it's this child that's in front of you. So the symbolism, it's less to do with these abstract things, it's just a pose, it's like really embodying that character. Measurehead is a little bit boring, he's just trying not to look mega black. So it would be, the joke would be a little bit more sophisticated than haha black racist. And it's also a little bit like all the colors are there, so it's, you know, universalizing him a little bit. The Glacia and Sylvie. The Glacia and the Sylvie portraits, it's interesting to compare the two actually, yes. Sylvie's painted in kind of a naturalism, it's like just a girl that you talk to who does not pretend to harbor great mysteries behind her, lives a decent life. Whereas of course Glacia is like just all shadow behind the fringe, the bangs, yes. Glacia was also one of the first portraits that I did. So it's a little bit more true to the original structure that I devised for the portraits. So one of these like tasks of, oh my god, gonna make this game and have to paint like so many portraits, is to figure out how do you do the portraits, what kind of like techniques do you use to do it with like optimal time, while also giving you all of these tools of symbolic expression. It was like constructed out of like these flat layers with less rendering time, almost just like posterized sort of feel, with dark blacks, kind of like a modernist technique to use like black lines and stuff in there. And Glacia was one of the early ones, so she was really like exemplifies this approach of like simplified flat shapes doing it. Later portraits, they get more complex as I sort of get more comfortable working in the style. But yeah, these are two people who are trying to communicate different things about themselves to you, so you perceive them differently. All the paintings are sort of the perception of Mr. Dubois, are all the Mr. Dubois' perception of the other. So for instance, the twin kids who are painted, the Lilien's twins, they're just the same image flipped, which is like a wonderfully cheap production trick, but also really does reflect the understanding that like a drunkard middle-aged man has. This child is like a flipped copy of that child.
What about Mr. Dubois himself then? Because he gets a number of different versions. And the expression, of course.
Yes, the expression. The expression had to be painted many times to find the exact nuance. I'm very glad that I repainted the mirror painting at the nick of time before release. But yes, Mr. Dubois' visage also keeps changing across every single image of him. One of the reasons is that you see, I am an amateur autodidact and I never learned how to draw the same face twice. And two, it's also, it's actually, forget I said that. It's, his self-image. Sometimes he thinks he's handsome, sometimes less so. It's all about that. But yes, well, the cool trick is that the first painting is this Francis Bacon, like a mystery man. Who even is this? You only see the soreness of his nose there or something. There's like red a little bit. And then you get to change the portrait reveal. I just also, every time a game does something on the UI, that it changes a UI element or like, it's just, I don't know, postmodern game design. It's sort of a game design rule or a game event that happens outside the usual event space where stuff happens in the game. That's just like juicy art school shit. Same thing when you go talk to the light bending guy. Then the net worth comes, your money goes like crazy, and I think you can get the net worth counter on your user interface and so on. I'm a big proponent of that type of game design. I must admit I might have learned that from Mr. Kojima.
And so ends the 4th episode in our series. In the next episode, we wander into the programmer's room and then follow the team as they split apart from their home base in Tallinn in the months leading up to launch. This period of time was the most tumultuous for the team and planted seeds for difficult times many of the development team would have over the coming years. If you'd like to watch that episode right now, you can do so over on our Patreon. Our work is entirely funded by people who care about telling the stories behind games, so we really appreciate all the folks who have contributed to our Patreon over the course of this season. We simply could not do this work without you.
Whether you draw with the pencil or whether you paint with the paintbrush and some wonderfully smelly natural medium with potentially toxic chemicals, or whether you do it digitally, in the end you're doing the same thing. And whether you are doing anime or realism, you're doing the same thing. In essence, there is this total truth of the image that you are trying to construct an expression of, an individual image, and any tool and any technique, any stylistic approach that you use is sort of equivalent in it, because fundamentally you're always thinking the same sort of thoughts about what shape, value and color should be next to what other shape, how does it make you feel, what are the cultural, symbolic implications of those things. So there is a great equivalence to all of them, but it is also, of course, a great superpower if you have managed to build up competency in all of them. Because there are tricks that are more easily discovered in one medium that you can then translate to another. Oil painting teaches you a certain thing which you can then try to recreate in digital. Digital teaches you other things which you then try to recreate in oil. It's this back and forth. I'm glad that I got to do a little bit of everything. It really taught me a lot about it.